Hi, thanks for joining us for a CEU webinar called LATCH Learning with Peachy. Just as a reminder, please do not participate in this webinar if you're operating a motor vehicle. The CPS board will post this recorded webinar to carseateducation.org, so you can earn a CEU by viewing and then taking a posted quiz and passing with a passing score. My name's Denise Donaldson. I'm the owner of Safe Ride News Publication, and one of our products is the LATCH Manual. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. The objectives of this session are to have you learn the latest of LATCH, of course, also how to find that information in the LATCH Manual as well as elsewhere. It's always a good idea to learn what's new in each edition that comes out in every 2 years. So the current one is 2023. And as always, I want to get across general tips to make your CPS work more accurate, efficient, and easy. So if you've been a technician for a long time and are familiar with the LATCH Manual, or maybe you've never really opened it up or you're just learning about it, I hope all listeners will have something to learn today about their use of the LATCH Manual to make their job better and more accurate. So I always have to start by pointing out that using the LATCH Manual, of course, in no way takes away the requirement to use your other resources, including, of course, the owner's manual for the car seat or booster, the labels on those devices, as well as, of course, the owner's manual for the vehicle. And all of those manufacturers are constantly improving their websites with more information, including posted videos. Just like those sources, though, the LATCH Manual contains information from manufacturers that they have provided to us, and we have edited, and then they have approved the way they are edited and printed in the LATCH Manual. So you want to look at the current LATCH Manual, which is currently why this presentation was called Peachy. It's a peach LATCH Manual. And when we update it in 2025, we'll come up with a new color, TBD. But for now, you should be using the Peach LATCH Manual. And I mention that because, yes, each 2 years we do update the manual by adding information that is about brand new car seats and brand new cars. But we also go through the entire manual and make sure that any updates are made. So that might include new information we want to add. It might include corrections, and sometimes it includes overall policy changes from the manufacturers. So in other words, you shouldn't be keeping any of the older manuals in your kit. We don't take out any of the older vehicles. Those are still going to be in your current edition. You really want to use only the current edition so that you know that the information you are giving families in the field is the most accurate and up to date. So in this presentation, I chose to do an approach that will take a scenario approach. In other words, I'm going to come up with a car seat in a car, and then we'll walk through what we'll find in the LATCH Manual for that. And so as we go along, we'll learn a little bit about how the LATCH Manual is laid out. But I also wanted to point out that I do have a LATCH Manual 101 community education session that's posted both on my Safe Ride News website and also at the carseateducation.org site. That's just a half an hour, and you can see that this one shows the prior LATCH Manual, the 2021 green one. And that's because even with that cover color, I made this presentation so that it would be evergreen in terms of the layout. So if you've been a tech a long time, you may have noticed that in the 20-some years that we've had a LATCH Manual, it has undergone several changes in its layout. Some appendix would come and go. But a few editions back, we pretty much settled into the layout that we want to keep going forward. And the advantage to that is that as you learn how to find things in there, we don't want to change that up every 2 years. We want to make that consistent. So while the information we get that we put in it is going to get updated, we work really hard to make sure that the layout stays the same from edition to edition so that we can all find the information easily. So if you want after this presentation to go check out more about the layout, also about where the information comes from, and a lot more details about what's in the manual, I would definitely encourage you to check out that Latch Manual 101 presentation. For our purposes today, though, we're just going to take a look at the various parts, and then we'll jump into those scenarios. And so definitely note that there are chapters at the beginning, that chapters 1 through 8, that are going to be kind of like your textbook for Latch, that are going to tell you about how to use Latch. And the picture on the left is just showing that if you fan the pages, you'll see on the edges of the pages how you helpful tabs to help you find each of these chapters. As we go through this presentation, we'll refer to some information on the chapters, but much more often it's going to be the information that are in the appendices, this part where the vehicle and car seat manufacturers have provided us technical details about all of their products. So in Appendix A, that's going to be the car seats. Appendix B, that's the vehicles. And then Appendix C brings that information together to discuss using Latch in center positions. So the picture on the left there is trying to show that if you fan the pages for the appendices, you're going to see the 3 sections delineated by that long black line along the edge that helps you find the beginning of those sections. And then within each section, the either car seat or vehicle manufacturers are going to have what we call entries listed in alphabetical order. And so you just be looking in alphabetical order. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there is a Latch Manual 101 presentation. And just to reiterate, you can find that posted in 2 different places, either at carseateducation.org, where you found this presentation, or at the Safe Ride News website under resources. Okay, so let's jump into our scenarios. So the first one we'll start right off with is a caregiver who owns a 2013 Dodge Grand Caravan, and they have a CLEC-LING for their first child coming soon. So this is a CLEC-LING, and I could have picked any car seat and we would have lots of information in the Latch Manual for the car seat and the car. I picked CLEC-LING though because it does have a few additional, it is one car seat that has many different features that we can discuss. So what would be helpful in the Latch Manual? So first of all, flipping to Appendix A, we want to go alphabetically to CLEC, and we find the beginning of CLEC, the CLEC entry on page A18. And I'm highlighting at the top here a very basic point, that is each of the entries has a directory. Think of the Latch Manual kind of as your directory to each of the manufacturer's contact information. So here you can find their toll-free number in the US and Canada. You can find their websites in the US and Canada, and you can even get their address, which isn't really so much to send them a letter or anything, but to be able to know what their time zone is. So if you're trying to make a call, or you know exactly when they would be open for business, etc. Okay, so then we go down. CLEC-LING is a rear-facing only seat. So the order in the Latch Manual is going to cover each type by the kind of the stages and ages. So we're going to start with rear-facing only, and then after that it will flow to convertibles, and then combination and booster seats. So the LING information is here, and as you notice, it mentions that the LING base has a load leg. This isn't always anything to do with Latch necessarily, but because this is a very popular energy management system that is kind of new to our market in the last several years, I've tried to note it in the description of the rear-facing seats and some convertibles when it exists. And if you haven't been working with seats with load legs yet, I would definitely urge you just to be aware of this information, just because you probably will see them. I mean, this is the same thing that is also called a support leg by some, or stability leg, or foot prop. But at this point, we have a lot of manufacturers. This is just the list I could kind of run through in my mind. I may even have missed one here, but each of these manufacturers has at least one model that has a load leg included. So this is coming up from being a kind of a rare thing to something that's much more common. So going back to our LING entry, or a rear-facing only entry in the CLEC entry, I want to point out that the LING actually has some information about the load leg. So this very first section is going to be about the lower anchor attachments. So under each section, we'll start with those, and then we'll go to tethers if that is applying. And then the first bullet is going to be about the design, and I'll always talk about whether it's rigid or flexible and what type of connector it has and that sort of thing. Then if there is any kind of relevant use information having to do with latch, then that section will be expanded to be design and use. And in this case, you can see underlined that there's actually some usage detail relevant to latch having to do with the load leg, being that if you can't use the load leg in the car you're working with, then they recommend, CLEC recommends installing with a seat belt rather than the lower anchor connectors. And then further down, you can see that there's an additional bit of detail that, you know, if there's any kind of tips to suggest for proper use, we like to include those here. So in this case, it's saying to be sure to fully extend the connectors, because partially extended connectors, every time you try to slide them toward those the lower anchors, they're just not going to attach properly as you push the car seat toward them. Now, as you'll notice, you know, this presentation is very Peach like my manual, but in some cases I want to transition over to talking about the actual car seat or car manuals, and so just be aware that that's when the page turns orange, more of an orange background, then we're talking about the manufacturer's instructions. And in this case, in the LING manual, I just want to point out that I did give that tip about making sure it's fully extended. In some cases, that is in the owner's manual, as it is for the LING manual. Other times it's something from the, maybe a question customer service gets a lot that wasn't in the manual, then they can report it to us and we can put it in the LATCH manual. So it might be either way. And even if it is in the manual, I'm going to take the information as it's written in the manual and then put it kind of in CPST vocabulary and write it out. Sometimes it ends up longer. In this case, it might be a little shorter, but it's going to be written for us as CPSTs. And then also I'm noting that the LING manual, I know the LATCH manual is pretty long. The LING manual is 106 pages long, so it's a pretty long one as well, and this is on page 55 of that. So I think it's probably nice that you have that information located in both places, just in terms of being able to make sure you found it when you're curbside. So if we keep going in that rear-facing only section, it continues on, and I just want to point out a couple other places that are highlighted here. One bit of information that you're always going to get is about the weight limit for the lower anchor attachment use. In this case, it's a rear-facing only seat, and so for all the rear-facing only seats, it says may be used at all allowed harness use weights. That's the way it is for all rear-facing only. However, just because that's true doesn't mean all technicians are going to know that. And so if you go looking for that information in the manual for the LING, you're not going to find the detail that's even going to talk about it, because it's always allowed to use. It makes it harder to try and find proof that it's okay to use it, though. And so I like to include that just so we have a very evident and easy to find yes or no for any kind of seat you're working with. And so that's going to be true for any of the other types as well. I also like to include a section on storing latch lower anchor attachments, because obviously we want to know what to do with an unused set of latch lower anchor attachments so that they are not loose when we install using a seatbelt instead. And there are even some cases where I've noted when a lower anchor attachment system has been stored, it can be tricky to find, and the owner's manual should give you this detail as well. But if you're not with the owner's manual at the time, or you're still having trouble, it's nice to have a place that kind of helps guide you to where they're going to be stored. Now, after you've gone through that whole section, so we're back looking at the rear facing only, we've gone through that whole section. Also remember that there's a section ahead, usually in most of the entries, where I've collected information that's true of every car seat model within that brand. So in this case, and these bullets may be different because the same thing may not be true for all car seats for every brand, but for CLEC, what we have here is going to be a bullet about center installation, which is frequently in that all car seat section, and a bullet about using a seatbelt and the lower anchor attachments together simultaneously. So those are in this all collect CRs, and I'll talk more about those topics later, but just remember you need to go back and also take that information into account. So after we've checked out everything about the type of car seat we have, and we've checked the information about all car seats so that we've considered that as well, I like to then go to the end of the entry to look at what I consider the extras. So on this page A21, you can see it starts up here at the top. This doesn't have its heading on this page, but this is basically the ending of the booster section. So we've gone through all the different kinds of collect car seats, and now we're going to the extras that are listed for CLEC. And so for CLEC, we have information about the inflatable seatbelt policy. We have information about whether there are differences in the information that's provided in the rest of the entry when we're in a school bus or if the car seat is used in Canada. So those are kind of the extras that CLEC has. Now, not every car seat has the same extras that are listed, and there's reasons for that I'll kind of go over. So I'll direct you to page A4. This is kind of your how to use the Appendix A page, and I bet most people have never looked at it, but I really would urge you to do so. It starts off by talking about how we get the information, which is kind of interesting to know about. You can see that it also provides some abbreviations and some other typical usage expectations. But down here, you can see it provides this information I've been kind of talking about with you now about how things are laid out with the alphabetical manufacturers in order, starting with the lower anchor attachments, then the tether. And then here are our extras that I've referred to. So those are going to include if there are any recalls about latch, so a latch related, not other kinds, if there are any recalls on car seats that have not fully expired, then those will be listed there. I've asked all the manufacturers if they have any advice on entanglement. So if they have given us any advice on how to keep a seatbelt that isn't used for installation, so a loose seatbelt from wrapping around the child's neck, they will give us that information to post there if they have advice on that. And you can see, like we had for CLEC, CLEC did have some different information about Canada and on a school bus. Now, some manufacturers say just follow all the advice in those environments, don't change anything. And then so those bullet points in the extras wouldn't be included. That would just mean even if you're on a school bus, even if you're in Canada, you keep doing it the same. But if there are any differences, then those will be listed. And the inflatable seatbelt policy, I think that the LATCH Manual is probably the only place, well, I know it's the only place that's for the last several years where you can get in one place what the inflatable seatbelt policy is for all the brands. So lastly, if the car seat manufacturer has created a QR code that goes directly to owner's manuals or videos for proper use, then I would post those here. So I'm not going to post, there's a lot of QR codes that go to marketing material, for instance. I'm not going to use those. But if they have a QR code where we can be curbside and go, oh, I'm going to go straight to their manual or straight to a usage video, then that's a super helpful thing for us to have. And so I'm including those QR codes when they provide them to me. All right, so let's shift over to look at the vehicle that we have. So in this case, again, the 2013 Dodge Caravan, great family vehicle. So what we're going to do is flip to that Appendix B and look alphabetically for Dodge on B55, and then within Dodge, alphabetically by the model of the vehicle, looking for the Grand Caravan, which we'll find on B64 in the table for vehicles with 3 or more rows. So it looks like this, and just stating that again, Note that it's in a table for vehicles with 3 or more rows. So we know it's a minivan, and so I have to make the table so we have enough columns for a second and third row. That's going to be a different layout of a table than one for 1 or 2 rows. So just be aware that the first section is going to be those smaller cars with only 1 or 2 rows, and that's alphabetical. And then we change over to this wider table or a table with more columns that we can list for the vehicles with 3 or more rows. Sometimes I hear from people who can't find an alphabetically listed vehicle, thinking that maybe it's not in the Latch Manual, but what they don't realize is they're looking in the wrong table. Either they're looking at the 3 or more rows when they should be in the other one, or vice versa. So just be aware of that. Now, our vehicle was a 2013, so we go down to the years 08 through 20. Clearly in that time frame, there was probably some remodels of that vehicle, but by and large, we could combine latch related topics all into one segment here. And so we end up with this information. So you end up with the same layout here in the various positions of the car, where it's going to tell you what latch hardware you can find in each of the positions. And then over here on the right, that's a whole bunch of great extra information about using car seats in that vehicle, including when, you know, where the tether anchors are, what their weight limit information is in this case. These minivans for a certain period of those years have swivel and go seats, so there's a reminder that those need to be locked in a forward-facing position. There's information about installing car seats with the particular head restraints that are in the model year 2011 through 2020 vehicles. So these aren't all specifically latch related. When it comes to the vehicle manufacturer information, sometimes they ask me, or we want to include information that is maybe goes a little beyond latch, that we know is going to be super important for child safety. So you might find a lot of extra information there, including this one that I'm highlighting, car seats with the support leg. In this case, the vehicle says, do not use car seats with a support leg in this vehicle, keep it stowed. And so, it does note, and I haven't mentioned the glossary yet, but we do have a good glossary at the beginning of the Latch Manual, so you can learn more about what they mean by support leg, which is just, like I said, another term for the load leg that is used by Dodge and its other sister brands. So that's important detail to get, because usually in those owner's manuals, they would not even address a support leg, because the manuals would have been written way before we were actually seeing those in car seats. So we've looked at the specific information for the model, and now we need to go back and also, just like we did with Appendix A, we want to look at the information that's true for all of the models. And so we go back to the very beginning to the page B55, where it says the start of Dodge. And I highlight the top again because, again, this is like your directory. If you want to call customer service, those numbers are here, their website's there. And then below that is what Katrina Rose, who works with me on the Latch Manual as the vehicle liaison, we call this the bullet section, and that's because this is where we've collected all these different bullets. And so here's our little title bullet section, and it does give you a description of what the bullet section is. So if you're ever like scratching your head when we say bullet section, we have on each page a definition of what that is. And so think of these as just your points that I couldn't fit into every single model note, but it kind of is supposed to go with every single model. It's going to apply to all those things. And so what we have at the top left will always be your latch hardware weight limits. And then in the center top, there's always going to be where we talk about center position borrowing, whether that is allowed or not, and when it's allowed, where it is allowed. And then there's a whole bunch of other bullets that I'm not going to have time to go into today. You can see that there are several there, and I certainly hope you will review those. That Latch 101 presentation I mentioned earlier goes into more detail about each of these. But I highlight a couple here. I mentioned that the car seat manufacturer might say something about shoulder belt entanglement, and we ask the vehicle manufacturer for advice on that as well. Many of them do provide advice in the bullets. And then this head restraint section is a really important one as well, because it's going to ask certain questions that we don't always see in the owner's manual, like, can I remove this head restraint when I'm installing a car seat? It might seem like, well, I can, but may I? Well, it might not say so in your owner's manual, but we've asked all the manufacturers to tell us whether that's okay, and so that would be stated so you have written approval. Most owner's manuals are going to actually only cover a 2-point tether, meaning the straight line tether. And if they're telling you to put that between the head restraint post, well, what if it's a 3-point tether, one that is more of the Y-shaped type? What do we do with that sort? And so we've asked them that question so you have it in writing there. Over here on the right-hand column, I want to bring your attention to a few other details here that would be on this side. So if we have any recalls that would apply to all of the cars in a brand, that's going to be listed here. And that sounds kind of weird because typically, you know, a recall is going to be model specific. But in this case of Dodge and some other of the Fiat Chrysler automobile sister brands, there were actually recalls on the owner's manual and how it was put together. And so we're going to have that recall listed there. And then in the user guide, there were also at a different period of time, there were some omissions from the user guide. So that's listed there as well. And then furthermore, some instructional resources from the manufacturer. So this is Dodge, which I mentioned is part of Fiat Chrysler automobiles. That's going to be Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Chrysler, and Fiat in the United States, part of the Stellantis global company. And those brands have additional instructional resources, and some other of our brands do as well. So whenever there are other resources available, we like to note that over here in the right-hand column so you know how to find them. And so what you're seeing here then is that for Dodge and for their sister brands, there are actually owner's manuals, there's user guides, and then there are what's called a CPS supplement as well. And so talk a little bit more about those, because that's a lot of places to get information. First question I would have is, well, what's the difference between an owner's manual and a user guide? And there's no like hard and fast rule about what the difference between those two things are. But in the automotive world, when there are both things, usually the owner's manual is going to be your absolute full compendium of the entire vehicle, whereas a user guide is going to be a more abridged, slightly shorter section. Now, when it comes to safety things like child passenger safety, that needs to be in both of those, both the owner's manual and the user guide, but when a user guide exists. But I would say that when I have compared the two, they are not necessarily exactly the same. So the owner's manual still might have a little more detail, including additional images and things that might clarify things. So whenever there's an opportunity to get an owner's manual over a user guide, I would always go to the owner's manual. And again, when it comes to Fiat Chrysler automobiles, there is also a CPS supplement. So if you've been doing this a while, or even if you haven't and you've just seen older cars manuals, you'll know that earlier on, the manuals did not talk as much about child passenger safety as perhaps they do today. Over the years, they're getting better and better. So that's a great thing. But Fiat Chrysler automobiles at around circa 2015 actually did a big project in which they provided supplements which were going to look back all the way back to the beginning, close to the beginning of LATCH. So shout out to Audrey Eagle of Fiat Chrysler at that time. She recognized that the manuals themselves didn't have everything that we might want. And so she created a template and filled it in for all the vehicles, vehicle types, and then models within the types going back. So that's another great resource for us to know about. Of course, the LATCH manual is going to utilize and refer to information from those supplements as well, but it's always nice to be able to actually look at those. Something to consider, though, while all these things are available online, it's great to get it, open the glove box and find the hard copy, of course. You're not going to find any CPS supplement there. But you might find the owner's manual. But if you're trying to find these things online, You're only going to find online owner's manuals from 2005 and onward. User guides started in 2010, so you're only going to find those 2010 and onward. And then the CPS supplements are going to run from 2001 through 2015. So there is some limitation for much older models. And when you do want to go look for those, this is the page on the MOPAR website. Now, MOPAR is a third party. You can see up here in the top left. This is that bullet from the LATCH manual that I was just referring to. And it's going to tell you, you're going to need to go to mopar.com and click View My Owner's Manual. And then when you enter in the 2013 Dodge Caravan, if you're trying to find the CPS supplement, which they've renamed Child Safety Manual here, you need to click on additional publications, and then you can go down to find that. We actually on the Safe Ride News website have a link to it as well. And I also like to make sure people are aware that at saferidenews.com/vehicle-OM, we have a really cool free resource that Katrina Rose developed. She, like I mentioned, is the vehicle liaison for the LATCH manual, and in that work, of course, she has done a great job figuring out how to track down owner's manuals. It's not always easy to do it. It's, as you can see here, this is a third-party site. You're not finding it on that website for the for those brands. It's going to send you to this other site, and other various there's nuances in each of the different brands, and so she has developed a resource that everyone can use, so you can kind of know what Katrina knows and go to the website in that way. So that's really handy. All right, let's transition to another scenario. How about if that car is instead a Ford Explorer with inflatable seatbelts, and the family is using a Kleck FOOMP for a 55-pound 6-year-old. And again, here we are with Kleck again. I picked that because it contains a lot of different information we can go over in one fell swoop, but I could have picked any other car seat model and found a lot of good information. But let's see what we would learn if we're using the Kleck FOOMP. So this should look familiar. We're going back to this page at the end of Kleck where we have our extras. And because we're working in a car with an inflatable seatbelt, it's great that we can actually find guidance as to how to use that FOOMP if we need to use it with a seatbelt. And it's a pretty heavy car seat with a older child, so we probably would be needing to use that seatbelt if we're going to be in the outboard position. So that's helpful to be able to find that there. Now, I've mentioned inflatable seatbelts a few times now. You might be wondering, well, maybe I've never seen an inflatable seatbelt, or I don't know that much about them. Then I would guide you to chapter 3, page 28, where I've given kind of a little story about inflatable seatbelts. And this is a short little story about it, and pretty much summarizes in a concise way as much as most of what you would need to know about using the story of inflatable seatbelts and using them for car seats. And I can kind of consider it a closed story because Ford and Lincoln started offering those in model year 2011, and then they discontinued offering it after the model year 2020 year. So we have this 1 decade of time where we might see those in cars, but they aren't going to be in cars going forward, at least not at this time. All right, so just like with the Kleck Ling, I'm now in a bigger convertible seat, so I'm going to go out to the next section and look in all Kleck convertibles. And because the FOOMP has a lot of really specific differences compared to a lot of other seats, there's actually even a FOOMP specific section to look at when you're working with FOOMP, and its kind of sister car seat Flow has its own section as well. So I don't have time in this webinar to go through every single one of these sections, so I'm going to bring our attention down here to tethers because, of course, tethering is so very important, and also the LATCH manual does contain information about tethering that you're not going to find in owner's manuals many of the times. Just like the lower anchor attachment section, the tether section starts with design, describing the tether strap, and then the next section that what's highlighted here is going to be if there are any times or conditions when you must use the tether. It's not just recommended but actually required, then that's going to be stated here like it has been for FOOMP or any Kleck convertible. And then I want to hop up here and think about some of these ones I mentioned that you're not necessarily going to find in an owner's manual, which isn't to say the owner's manual isn't good, but these are some details that are really specific to a very certain situation in certain cars. And so it's going to be a case specific, not general advice about using the tether. So this first one is tether hook orientation, asking, may the hook be turned in backwards or a 180-degree twist if directed by the vehicle maker. And in this case, if the vehicle maker says to, you may do that. So the reason we have to have this question asked and answered by each of the brands is because there are actually several vehicles in which they say to turn the tether hook upside down to do the attachment. And so in Appendix B, in the model information, you're going to find over here in the section on the notes, it's going to say what it says in the manual, which is to make that tether hook turn a half twist. Now, some years ago, Katrina and I noted that even though the manufacturer says to turn the hook a half twist in several owner's manuals, we felt like maybe we could, if we knew what we were doing as a CPST, we could maybe get it in the typical way where you're not twisting the strap, you're putting it on directly. Wouldn't that be okay? And we were kind of told that no, if it says to turn it a half twist, please turn it a half twist. It may have to do with something with how the hook's spring interacts with the contours of the vehicle seat. And what we wouldn't want to have happen is for in a crash to have it come detached. So we're looking at that as something we want to do when it says to do it. However, we do have to go back and make sure it's okay with the car seat manufacturer. Kleck says it's okay. Some of the other brands say, even when the vehicle maker says you have to do it, they say not to do it. So that would be a true incompatibility. Another area that is not really well known, but is kind of historically a way to tether when there isn't a factory installed tether, is anchoring the tether to a seatbelt, being a seatbelt from the row behind the car seat. And so if that sounds very strange to you, I'm not surprised. It's something, we've had factory installed tether anchors for over 20 years. But before that, it wasn't uncommon to have advice in the owner's manual, which is the advice that's offered in owner's manuals today for those older vehicles, that advises to attach that tether hook to a seatbelt from the row behind. So this image that's shown here from the Latch Manual is in a school bus. That's why it looks a little odd for a car, but the concept is the same. And if you look at chapter 5 in pages 47 and 48, it's going to tell you in this section, as well as it goes even longer than this, to kind of describe the technique you'd need to use. There's a few different ways that you could do this, and that you need to follow certain techniques to do it safely. So we have these car manuals, and it's stated in the Latch Manual for any of those that were from the close to the Latch era from long ago, and many cars from before that maybe aren't even reported for the Latch Manual, you may find have this advice to do tethering this way, especially in pickup trucks that have a very small back seat. They might have that side-facing jump seat or a seat that's too small for a car seat. The advice would be to install a car seat on the front seat and tether to the seat belt that can't be used for a car seat installation in the back. Yet you have to make sure it's okay with the car seat manufacturer too. And so I collected a bunch of these manuals and brought that to the attention of the car seat manufacturers. And many of them would say that you can do that. This one says, you may not do that unless this method is specified in the vehicle owner's manual. So that would also apply to whether it's stated in the Latch Manual, because that would match up. But there are also some brands that have it stated in the bullet section that you may do that generally in their 3-row vehicles. So just be aware of that as well. There's also going to be information in this section always on saying whether tethering rear facing is allowed. Typically that's a little short section, because in most cars, tethering rear facing is, or most car seats do not allow tethering rear facing. So it's just going to say that, so you'll know whether or not it's allowed. In the case of CLEC, it's actually, and most people may not realize this, but it is actually allowed to tether in the Swedish fashion with the tether that's on the car seat if the car has dedicated rear tether anchors, like in some Volvos or Saabs. So that would be one way you could do it. And then they also have an accessory that is added to their CLEC Foom for Flow that can be used to tether rear facing in a more of an Australian fashion. So in the picture there, this strap that's running back across the top of the seat and then attaching to the tether anchor of the vehicle, that's the factory standard factory anchor. This isn't the tether strap on the CLEC. This is an additional accessory Q tether that is actually running through the back of the seat in kind of around each side of the car seat. And so that is an additional way that they allow energy management to be enhanced using rear-facing tethering. And if you're not familiar with rear-facing tethering, well, I'm not really surprised, because there really isn't something we do a lot of. It's not something that's really covered very much in the certification curriculum. So I am glad that we have chapter 7 in the LATCH manual. That's just a short 7.5 pages, but just if you review that, you're going to be all caught up on what to do if you ever do see a rear facing car seat that allows rear tethering, and you'll learn why you might want to do that and some of the other tips and tricks. So unlike other chapters, Chapter 6, which is about retrofitting certain cars, and Chapter 7, which is about rear tethering, those two chapters do have manufacturer-specific instructions embedded in them. So we have, as we go along, you can see in the highlighted area, there's a particular usage detail that is a warning from Diono and CLEC, for instance, here. So you're going to go through and you would find those kind of details. And then the last, page 7 of this chapter is actually a table that lists all the car seats that currently allow rear tethering. And so we have the CLEC information about that, the Q tether in the Australian fashion, and then the Swedish fashion would be allowed if your car happens to have dedicated anchors, which is usually only true in a Swedish made car. And then at the bottom of that page, I actually have listed all the expired seats. So this page really does list in the US and Canada what seats have ever been allowed to be tethered rear facing. And if you're starting to have your head swim and say, well, how am I supposed to find all this information about this particular brand in all those chapters? Well, don't forget we have an index. So for CLEC, I can go back to the index and look for the pages and see if there's relevant information I want to use on any of those sections that come before their Appendix A entry. All right, then there is information about tether extenders as well in Appendix A, and obviously a tether extender is like the name sounds. If you have a tether that can't quite reach the anchor and you need it to be longer, a tether extender is your solution. But nowadays, another reason people use a tether extender is if you are trying to get your tether through a small space, but the adjuster is too big to fit, then the tether extender is another function of that, is a way to use it so that you can make things fit. I'll show you that in a minute. In this case, CLEC has a tether extender for that very reason, but they do note that as of mid-2018, that adjuster on their tether strap was made narrower, so it isn't going to today cause as many problems getting through tight spaces. But it mentions in this section, for more on this topic, see page 43. So on page 43, that's part of chapter 5, we have this little section that just talks about routing tethers with bulky adjusters. And it kind of shows you, as we maybe haven't thought much about it, but the hooks are all uniform. There's actually a design requirement in the standard that makes the hook a certain size. So those hooks aren't a problem, but the adjusters can be a variety of different widths as well as depths and heights. So it can be really much more tricky to get those through tight spaces. And the picture up here just shows an example of being difficult getting underneath this head restraint at its highest height. And so it mentions down here at the bottom that you can find more information about how to use a tether extender to pass through a tight space by using Safe Ride News's LATCH Gallery, and that's going to give you some guidance on that. So if you're not familiar with the LATCH Gallery, that's a free tool at the Safe Ride News website under LATCH. It's also on the footer, quick link, and you get a page like this, and you can select view the gallery for tether anchors, view the gallery for lower anchors. In fact, you can, if you don't see a car that you think should be in here, take pictures and submit it in the submission button. But here we're going to, if we clicked on tether anchors section and we go to find, it's listed under the Volvo head restraint section. I won't have time to go through this in detail in this webinar, but the point being, please go to the LATCH Gallery to find these kind of details about exactly what you do step by step if you have a tether extender and a car seat where you need to go through a tight space. In this case, it's one of these Volvo tight head restraints posts that you can't get the bigger adjusters through. Well, you can do so with the use of a tether extender. All right, and the last thing I wanted to talk about with the CLEC example is this point about using the lower anchor attachment and seatbelt simultaneously. So for each of the car seat manufacturers, this point is going to be brought up. And in most cases, as we know, it says don't do this. However, in the case of CLEC FOOMF, the rigid latch is connected to a very specific energy management system in the seat. And so the manufacturer, so that you can continue to get that benefit of that particular energy management, they would rather you continue to use latch and then add the use of the seatbelt afterward. And so in their instructions, so this going back out to the CLEC FOOMF owner's manual, it clearly states that you can do that when you're using rigid latch connectors, a vehicle belt, and a top tether. It's going to say you should do that only if these situations don't occur, right? If it's not lining up properly with the belt, then that's going to be a problem. It also says under important over here that you should not do this if the vehicle manufacturer prohibits it in the vehicle owner's manual. So this is where the words really matter, right? It doesn't say unless the vehicle manufacturer says you may. It says don't do it if it says you may not. So it's nice to kind of be able to know for sure. And here, because our car is this 2016 Ford Explorer, we have the luxury or the good fortune that they are very clear about this, right? They have a nice table that's very well laid out and easy to read. And it says for these forward-facing seats up to and over, sure, go ahead and use a seatbelt and latch. You can use just a seatbelt in the top tether also, but you could also use both together. So that's very nice and clear. What I haven't done for the car manufacturers, and this is very deliberate, because I don't want to end up with a statement that says it's prohibited, I don't put them on the spot by asking them to say yes or no about whether both can be used together, because for the vehicles, this is not something that the vehicle manufacturers are, they don't know, they can't test it with every single different car seat, and they're not required to meet any federal standards for using both at the same time. So it's very likely, if I were to ask them to say yes or no in Appendix B, they would decide they must say no. So rather than put them in a situation where they must say no about this, I have in Chapter 3 on pages 23 and 24, a lot of people ask for this. Where is this? It's in Chapter 3, and there's going to be a section in here that does define or describe which of the car manufacturers do say it's okay. They outwardly in their owner's manuals or have told us that it's okay, and that would be Ford and Lincoln, Mercedes, and Porsche. For any others, definitely check the owner's manual and see if there's anything in there that says that's prohibited. And if you're not certain, absolutely call the manufacturer's customer service to describe the particular situation. So now what if we have a scenario where we have that same collect FOOMP, but we are in a 2017 BMW X4 crossover? In that case, and the main reason I wanted to point this out, of course, we have all the other stuff we just talked about, the value of the various notes, the value of the bullets. But in this case, I want to point out that we also in Appendix B are going to list vehicle recalls that are related to latch. So just like we do that in the Appendix A, but in this case, the cars never expire. So there's a surprising number of these that are there. And I also want to point out for 2023, Katrina and I made a formatting change so that the recalls are set inward like this. And we did it a little bit for a layout reason, but also just so that we could call them out a little bit. It's kind of easier to flip through the book and find recalls this way. So in our case of the X4, we have a recall for that year of the car that says the lower anchor bars may be damaged when a car seat with rigid lower anchor connectors is installed. So this is definitely something that they'd want to get fixed in any case for any future use, but certainly if they're using a FOOMP, then that's a good recall to know about. And since we're on this page, I also wanted to point out, because one exists on this page, there are several throughout the Latch Manual points in the note section that are going to be corrections, clarifications, or updates to what's stated in the Owner's Manual. Usually we have a heading for that says Owner's Manual Clarification, but basically in this particular sport activity vehicle, the X5, pretty popular vehicle, it says in the Owner's Manual that you can't use the rear seats for car seats, but that are rear facing, but that was a remnant from their European manuals. So that clarification has been made here so that you understand that what's stated in the manual is updated here in the Latch Manual. And in general, when it comes to that, you can count on the Latch Manual has been reviewed within the last 2 years. A lot of times your Owner's Manual is much older than that. So in that respect, the Latch Manual should be more current and up to date. Still, I think it's really valuable for CPSTs to have it really be stated, yes, this is the right information. It clarifies what's in the manual, because I don't like you to have to hope or guess that it's accurate compared to what's in a manual. I want you to actually have that flatly stated. So we try to call that out whenever it's possible. Whenever we know about it, we call it out. If you see any discrepancies from what's in a Latch Manual compared to what's in a manual out there in the field, that's very helpful to us to hear about. So please do let us know, because we would want to investigate the situation and call it out in a clarification so it's really clear which bit of information is accurate. So with the little bit of time we have left, I want to cover one more scenario, and that would be talking about that borrowing situation in a center position that I referred to earlier. So in this case, the family owns that same Ford Explorer, but they want to use it in the center with their Graco Milestone car seat. So what parts of the Latch Manual would be helpful? Again, we're going to look at all those parts we just looked at, but in particular, when we're trying to find out about whether borrowing is okay, we have certain places we're going to look. And just so everybody's clear what we're talking about, here we have a typical scenario where we have latch only in the outboard positions. That's standard latch. We have, meaning that they're set 11 inches apart. The Owner's Manual describes this as a designated latch position. And when the manufacturer tests it to make sure it's strong enough, they pull in the direction of these orange arrows directly outward from the two bars, because they've been set at a width that should be right along the sides of a standard width of a car seat. Now, if we wanted to try to use the inner bars of the outboard positions, so using those two inner bars instead, that's what we call borrowing. And when we borrow, it's typically, or almost virtually always, more than 11 inches apart. So those yellow arrows are showing that a pull in a real life wouldn't be pulling straight out, but from each side. So that's going to make a difference as to how a car seat installs. It might make a difference in their crash dynamics. It might make a difference in the strength of the bars paired together. So in all of those ways, it's very clear that it has to be okay with the car seat manufacturer to be installed that way, and it has to have been tested and approved by the car manufacturer that pairing those two bars together and having the pole be in that angle is all okay with them too. So it has to be a yes from both manufacturers. So going to Appendix B, we're going to find out, is it okay by Ford? And we always look in the top of the bullet section. In the top center is where you're going to get that information. Looking in Appendix A, similarly, it's going to be toward the beginning of each of the entries. It's in every single entry. Usually it's in the all car seats of that brand section. And in this case, the words are going to describe what Graco says is allowed on page A40. And then to support those words, I've made this little table because really it's a yes or a no dependent on the type of car seat it is and what type of connector is used. So that's what the table, it just supports what's in the text. And to further support you in this whole thought process of whether the car seat allows it, whether the car allows it, and kind of deciding on a cross-reference, we have this table in Appendix C. So remember I said Appendix C is that little teeny appendix at the back of the book. So it starts off with a one-pager that just describes using car seats in the center, okay? And then Table A is going to be a section that's all about borrowing. And I'm not going to talk about it today, but don't forget there's also Table C2, which is about standard latch in the center. So what we're talking about here with borrowing, that's when it's wider than 11. But in some cars, we do have the standard latch in the center. And so that's a really cool Table C2 because it lists every single one that's ever been provided for the center standard, and it describes how it's set up. So please check that out. But we'll finish up just looking at this table about borrowing. So here we have underlined, we found Graco up here. Across the top is where you're going to have all your brands that do allow it, sorted by how wide it can be. So for Graco, it just needs to at least be 11 inches or anything larger. And then if you look across, we have a catch-all for any brand that's not listed, then all the answers will be no. Okay. Then across each of the rows, that's going to be where you find your various car brands, then you find your car, then you find your model year, and they are sorted by the width between the space between the two bars when it's the center. So in the Explorer that we're working with, the bars are over 20 inches and up to 22 inches. And so to go matching up with Graco, that's going to be a yes. If it's for other brands that only allow it up to a certain number of inches, it might be no. Also very important to notice, however, is that there are footnotes for certain of the brands of car seats. Baby Jogger and Graco are together as one brand. And that #1 footnote goes into the details that we discussed in the table about the different kinds of push-on and hook-on connectors that you'd have to check with. So again, this is a quick reference table. It's going to pull information from Appendix A and B, which we'd consider our source material, but it's a quick way to just see the answer yes or no. And I like to also point out that because we have so many more vehicle brands that have been coming on the market with models that do allow borrowing, I started this table many years ago as a one-pager, and now I'm barely being able to contain it onto 2 pages, which is a good problem to have when this is considered, something that parents frequently want to be able to use latch in the center. So this is giving us more situations where we have in the box, yes, you may do it. So just to wrap things up, please remember that, again, use the current latch manual, but even between editions, we do have updates sometimes, and if there are updates come along that are important to add to that, they are freely available at the saferidenews.com website. Under Latch, you'll find the updates posted. We do have one set posted for this latch manual, and again, those have been approved and reviewed by the manufacturer. There's a lot of other support on the website, including that LATCH gallery. So I do encourage you to go there and check under LATCH. Also look under resources. There are a lot of great resources for CPSTs. Under a tab for CEUs or under LATCH, you can also find a LATCH manual quiz, because this would be a great time to take it now that you've just learned all of this. If you go there, you can gain another CEU, and as long as it's a 20-question quiz, that you'd want to have the LATCH manual with you. In fact, there's a password on the inside cover that you'll need to have to take the quiz. And if you get a score of 16 or more, you can earn a CEU, and you'll get that proof electronically immediately. So I would like to conclude just by saying thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. And the way Katrina and I learn about LATCH, one of our best ways is for all of you out in the field to bring us your findings, the things you hear about, the questions you have, the things perhaps you don't find clear enough. And that's where we really work hard to make sure that the information in the manual is updated so that the next time someone tries to use it, they will find the information that they're looking for in an easy and effective way. So thank you very much for joining us today.